The coastal guards had no idea that this strange blue boat would soon become the center of a terrifying situation when they first spotted it. None of their radars had picked up the metallic blue vessel, and once they stepped aboard, there wasn't much they could do to stop what unfolded. But before we dive into this story, go ahead and hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed and tap the bell so you won't miss any of our future stories. It was about 3 miles from shore during a routine inspection when the crew first noticed the boat. They almost passed right by it. At first, it looked like a small speck in the distance until one of the 7 guards pointed and said, "Hey, there's something out there in the water." As they got closer, the team realized the floating object was much bigger than they originally thought. Oddly, their radar wasn't picking it up at all. It was like the boat was invisible to their system. The captain checked the monitor again, but it only showed their own ship. The boat's deep blue color blended so well with the waves that it was easy to miss. Trying to figure out what they were dealing with, the crew called out, hoping someone on board would answer. "This is the Coastal Guard. Anyone inside that blue boat?" But even after calling out multiple times, there was no reply. A strange silence hung in the air, and the tension was starting to build. They decided to try bringing the vessel in. The team tossed a rope with a hook over to it, expecting to tow it in without much trouble. The craft didn't look too large, so with their full team pulling, it should have been easy. But instead of the blue boat moving, their own ship started getting pulled toward it. "What is this thing?" the captain said, his voice a little shaky. "This is way more than it looks." Once their boats finally touched, one of the crew members muttered, "We're just seeing the tip of the iceberg." He didn't know then that he'd later wish he hadn't said that the captain quickly gave the order for him and another guard to go investigate. Brendan, the coastal guard chosen to go in, felt uneasy, but he couldn't let his team down, not while they were all watching. He carefully stepped onto the top of the strange blue boat. Moving slowly toward the small windows near the top, John, one of his crewmates, climbed up with him. They both leaned in, trying to peek inside. But the little windows were almost completely dark, offering no real view. There was only one thing left to do. "We've got to open it," Brendan said quietly. John nodded, and together they lifted the hatch on the top of the boat. The hatch creaked loudly as it opened, revealing a staircase that disappeared into darkness. Not being able to see the bottom made them hesitate. They looked over at the captain, half hoping he'd change his mind, but the older man simply said, "We're right here. Go on." Brendan pulled a flashlight from his pocket and aimed it down the steps. What they didn't know then was that going inside would be a decision they'd deeply regret. Once they reached the bottom, John and Brendan swept the light around. Inside, the boat looked much rougher than expected. It was run down and mostly empty. "Who was piloting this thing? There's nobody here," John said, frowning. Besides a worn-out control panel in the center, the rest was just empty metal walls. Brendan gave a small shrug and tried to radio back to the crew. But his walkie-talkie crackled, making it hard to understand anything clearly. Then things took a sudden turn. Above them they heard a sharp creak, and before they could react, the top hatch slammed shut. Panic spread across the Coastal Guard ship as the crew watched the hatch close on its own. They tried reaching out to Brendan and John, but the signal was gone. The 2 men inside were now completely cut off, and things were about to get even worse. The blue boat began to shake. John and Brendan hurried up the ladder and stared at their own ship in alarm. "What is happening right now?" John asked, his voice tight with fear. The strange vessel seemed to be moving on its own and slowly sinking beneath the waves. That would be their last glimpse of the surface. Brendan tried to keep calm, forcing his voice to stay steady. "John, take a breath. We're not sinking. The boat isn't taking on water." But John didn't seem reassured. "Then who's doing this? If it's not sinking, someone must be controlling it." Brendan tried to stay calm as long as he could, but it wasn't long before both men started to panic. They pounded their fists on the hatch at the top of the ladder, but it wouldn't move an inch. It was no use, and within seconds the boat had fully gone underwater. That's when something clicked in Brendan's mind. "This isn't just a boat, it's some kind of submarine, he said. Wide-eyed, John gave a quick nod, agreeing, though it didn't change how trapped they felt. They tried again to reach their team, but the signal was completely dead. Brendan's thoughts flashed back to the moment they first spotted this strange blue vessel. Why was it so hidden? The color blended in with the sea, and it blocked out all signals. It made sense now why it hadn't shown up on radar. But what was its purpose? Wherever it was headed, it clearly wasn't random, and Brendan and John were about to find out the hard way. With no way out, they used the time to search the submarine for anything that might give them a clue. Their first stop was the main console, located toward the front end of the sub. Just then, John spoke up. The console looked outdated, with clunky buttons and old cables running from the back, like something out of a movie from the 80s, but even with its solid build, it didn't seem to control anything useful. "Brendan, check this out. There's a door over here." Brendan spun around to see John standing at the other end of the sub, pointing toward a large metal door with a thick handle. In all their panic, they'd overlooked it completely. "What do you think's behind it?" Hoping their combined strength might be enough, they grabbed the handle and pushed down together. But just like the hatch, this door wouldn't move. It was sealed tight. Defeated, the two men slumped down on the floor, breathing hard. That's when the submarine began to shake again, just like it had about 30 minutes earlier. But this time, the motion felt different. It was going up. "There's light. Look at the top window," John said, his voice rising with hope. "How is that possible?" But Brendan didn't let the sudden burst of hope distract him. Deep down, he had a bad feeling about where this was all heading. Loud, banging noises echoed from above as the submarine surfaced. "Someone's coming! Get down!" Brendan whispered urgently to John, who was still trying to gather his thoughts. The two of them sprang to their feet and ducked behind the main console on the far end of the sub. Just moments later, the hatch at the top swung open. 3 people climbed down and headed straight toward the sealed door. Brendan cautiously peeked out from behind the corner. He watched as the unfamiliar men, who looked tough and serious, somehow got through the locked door without using any tools. But when they came back out, they were carrying heavy loads. "What is this place? And what are they taking out?" Brendan's mind raced to make sense of it. Over the next half hour, the men went back and forth, hauling dozens of heavy-looking items up to the surface. Somehow, Brendan and John weren't spotted during the entire operation. Still, that didn't mean they were safe. Once the men finished unloading everything, the inside of the submarine fell quiet again. Neither Brendan nor John dared to speak, but both noticed the same thing. The hatch above had been left wide open. This was their chance. Without a word, the two of them moved quickly toward the ladder, Brendan climbing up first. As they reached the top, a cool ocean breeze hit their faces. But that moment of relief quickly turned to confusion. They looked around and saw nothing but open sea, no shoreline in sight. What shocked them most was the massive oil rig structure floating above them, held up by 4 gigantic pillars. "Where on earth did this ship bring us?" John asked, his voice shaking. The two men carefully made their way up the long ladder that led from the submarine to the main platform. What they found at the top left them stunned. The oil platform was buzzing with activity. Workers were moving crates and machines rolled back and forth, shifting cargo. Brendan and John crouched behind some large shipping containers, trying to stay hidden while they figured out what to do next. One thing was clear: this wasn't an oil operation. So then, what exactly was this place being used for? The two men moved carefully through the area, staying low and quiet. They had a couple of close calls along the way. At one point, John tripped over a loose wire and 2 nearby workers turned around, almost catching a glimpse of them. But somehow they managed to make it across the platform without getting spotted, and after all the sneaking around, they finally saw what was really going on. Hiding behind a large container, Brendan spotted an older man who looked to be in his mid-60s. "He's got to be the one in charge," John whispered. Unlike the others, this man was dressed sharp, clearly standing out. The same three men from the submarine placed the heavy packages in front of him. Brendan and John watched closely as the older man tore open one of the bundles, peeling back the foil and pulling out a thick stack of cash. That was all they needed to see. This was clearly something illegal. But stuck out here in the middle of nowhere, there wasn't much Brendan and John could do for now. All they could do was keep watching. The older man then raised his hand, signaling for something else. A second large bundle was carried out and placed next to the money. One of the workers sliced it open with a knife, and a fine white powder stuck to the blade. Brendan and John's eyes widened instantly. They knew exactly what that was. As Coast Guards, they'd come across drugs before, but never on this scale. Brendan's biggest bust had maybe been 4 pounds at most. But this one package looked 5 times that size. And it was just one of many. There had to be a whole lot more hidden out of sight. If you found this story interesting, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching.